Instructor Vextar's claws danced over the gravity control panel like a pianist playing his favorite tune. His 3 eyes gleamed with pure malice as he cranked the settings up to 2.4 times standard gravity. This was his absolute favorite day of the year at the Galactic Defense Academy human arrival day. The Academy had been pulling this same cruel joke for decades. Every time a human showed up thinking they could join the elite galactic military, the instructors would secretly double the gravity and sit back to watch the show. Most humans lasted maybe 10 minutes before they were crawling on the floor, gasping for air like fish out of water. Some didn't even make it that far. This never gets old, Vextar chuckled to his assistant, a nervous-looking creature with too many arms. The other alien instructors had gathered around the observation windows like spectators at a gladiator match. They'd even started making bets on how long this human would last. The transport shuttle's doors hissed open with a cloud of steam, and James Mitchell stepped onto the Academy deck. His worn military boots hit the metal flooring with a sharp clang that echoed through the docking bay. The sound was different from what the instructors expected, heavier, more solid, like he was carrying extra weight around James. The other new recruits were already showing the effects of the doubled gravity. The tall, graceful Altarians, who normally moved like dancers, now stumbled forward with jerky, awkward steps. Their usually proud postures had crumpled into hunched, desperate attempts to stay upright. The Reptacs, covered in their natural armor-like scales, were faring even worse. Their heavy bodies, designed for their low-gravity homeworld, now felt like they were made of lead. One Reptac cadet actually fell to his knees, right there on the dock, his breathing coming in short, panicked gasps. Another was gripping the wall for support, his scales turning a sickly yellow color that meant serious distress in his species. James looked around at his struggling fellow recruits with what could only be described as mild confusion. He tilted his head slightly, like someone trying to figure out why everyone else was having trouble with something that seemed perfectly normal to him. Then he did something that made Vextar's jaw drop open. He rolled his shoulders in a casual stretch, the kind of movement someone might make after sitting too long in a cramped shuttle seat. His neck cracked audibly as he worked out a kink, and then he started walking toward the Academy entrance with perfectly normal, relaxed strides. "What in the 7 hells?" Vextar whispered, pressing his face against the observation window. His assistant was frantically checking the gravity readings, convinced the equipment must be malfunctioning. James wasn't stumbling. He wasn't gasping for breath. He wasn't even walking like someone fighting against crushing gravitational force. If anything, he looked more comfortable than he had stepping off the shuttle. His posture was straight, his breathing was steady, and he was actually looking around the facility with genuine curiosity, like a tourist admiring the architecture. The other instructors started murmuring among themselves in their various alien languages, but the tone was universal, confusion mixed with growing alarm. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. Humans were supposed to be weak, fragile creatures from a backwater planet. They were supposed to collapse under the Academy's enhanced gravity, like every other human before them. But James just kept walking, occasionally pausing to help one of his alien classmates who had fallen behind. At one point, he actually offered his arm to a struggling Altarian female, supporting her weight as if the extra gravity meant nothing to him. Vextar's wicked grin slowly faded into something more like bewildered concern. For the first time in his long career of tormenting human recruits, he was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they had picked the wrong human to mess with. The obstacle course at the Galactic Defense Academy was legendary throughout the known galaxy. It had been designed by the most sadistic minds in military training, a brutal combination of climbing walls, crawling through narrow tubes, jumping across gaps, and carrying heavy equipment. Under normal gravity, it was challenging. Under doubled gravity, it was supposed to be impossible for most species. James Mitchell had just shattered Every record they had, the holographic timer floating above the finish line showed numbers that made Vextar's 3 eyes bulge out of their sockets. Not only had James completed the course, but he'd done it faster than any cadet in the Academy's 200-year history. The previous record holder had been a Zentarian, a species known for having muscles like steel cables and bones harder than most metals. Behind James, the obstacle course looked like a battlefield after a disaster. Alien cadets were scattered across various sections, most of them flat on their backs and wheezing like broken air filters. A few had made it halfway before giving up entirely. The Altarian female who James had helped earlier was still stuck on the second obstacle, her elegant limbs shaking with exhaustion as she tried to pull herself up a rope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Vextar kept staring at the timer, convinced it had to be broken. He ran diagnostics on the system 3 times, but the numbers didn't change. James Mitchell, human from some backwater planet nobody had ever heard of, had just made every other species in the galaxy look like weaklings. But what happened next made the instructor's world tilt on its axis. James walked over to the instructor's station with the same casual stride he'd shown all day. His breathing was steady and normal, like he'd just taken a pleasant stroll through a park instead of conquering the most brutal training course in known space. There wasn't even sweat on his forehead. "Excuse me, sir," James said with the kind of polite tone someone might use when asking for directions. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but would it be possible to increase the gravity setting?" Vextar's tentacles, which had been twitching with nervous energy all day, suddenly went completely still. His translator device made a small beeping sound, as if it wasn't sure it had heard correctly. "Increase it," Vextar managed to croak out. "Yes, sir, if that's not too much trouble." James scratched the back of his head with an embarrassed smile. "This feels a bit light to me. Maybe triple the standard gravity. I grew up on a mining colony world, and the gravity there was pretty intense. This actually feels easier than what I'm used to back home." The words hit Vextar like a physical blow. The human was asking for more punishment. He was treating their cruelest prank like it was too easy. Other instructors started gathering around the control station, like moths drawn to a flame. Word was spreading through the facility that something unprecedented was happening. Alien voices whispered frantically in a dozen different languages, but the tone was universal: shock, confusion, and growing fear. Assistant Trainer Colder, a massive creature covered in natural armor plates, leaned over to Vextar. "Did that human just ask us to make training harder? Triple gravity would be 3.6 times standard," another instructor whispered. "That would kill most of our regular cadets." Vextar's mind was racing. In all his years of tormenting human recruits, none of them had ever made it through the first day, let alone asked for the training to be more difficult. This James character was rewriting everything they thought they knew about his species. "Sir," James prompted politely, apparently taking the stunned silence as consideration of his request. "I don't want to be presumptuous, but if you have the capability to adjust it, I'd really appreciate the extra challenge. I want to make sure I'm getting the full academy experience." The instructors exchanged terrified glances. Their cruel joke hadn't just backfired, it had revealed something about humans that was going to change everything. The moment Vextar cranked the gravity to 3.6 times standard, the Galactic Defense Academy transformed into something that resembled a torture chamber more than a training facility. What had been challenging before now became physically impossible. For most alien species, the Altarian cadets, who were already struggling at double gravity, now found themselves completely pinned down. Their elegant, lightweight frames simply weren't built for this kind of punishment. One female cadet was actually crying as she tried to lift her standard-issue plasma rifle, the weapon now feeling like it weighed as much as a small vehicle. Her arm shook violently with the effort before she finally gave up. Letting the rifle clatter to the floor, the reptacs were faring even worse. Their natural armor, which had been an advantage in their low-gravity homeworld, now felt like they were wearing suits made of solid metal. One particularly large Reptok male had fallen flat on his face during the morning drill and couldn't get back up. He lay there making pitiful whimpering sounds, while his squadmates tried unsuccessfully to help him. But James Mitchell moved through this hellscape like he was taking a casual walk through his neighborhood back home. Not only was he moving normally, but he was actually carrying extra equipment. When his Altarian teammate collapsed under the weight of her gear pack, James simply slung it over his shoulder, along with his own. When the Reptok in his squad started falling behind during the combat simulation, James grabbed him under one arm and half-carried, half-dragged him through the course. Lieutenant Rebecca Thompson, the human liaison officer stationed at the academy, watched this entire spectacle from the observation deck with what could only be described as barely contained laughter. She'd been assigned to the academy specifically to help human recruits adjust to alien training methods, but she'd never seen anything quite like this. You know, she said to the group of increasingly panicked alien instructors clustered around the gravity controls, you might want to think about changing your hazing tactics. Vexstar was frantically adjusting dials and checking readings, convinced that something had to be wrong with the gravity generators. The human should be unconscious by now, he muttered to himself. Or dead. Definitely dead. Down on the training floor, the team combat exercise was turning into something that would go down in Academy legend. The scenario was designed to test squad coordination and tactical thinking under pressure. Teams of 6 cadets were supposed to work together to neutralize a series of holographic enemy targets. While navigating through a maze of obstacles, James's team consisted of 2 Altarians, 2 Reptaks, and 1 Zentarian. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a formidable group. Under triple gravity, it was basically James plus 5 very expensive pieces of decorative furniture. The Altarians had found positions behind cover and were staying there, not by tactical choice, but because they literally couldn't move fast enough to change positions. The Repteks were in similar situations, though they'd at least managed to prop their weapons on barriers to help with aiming. The Zentarian, normally the strongest member of any squad, was lying flat on his back, making what sounded like death rattles. James, meanwhile, was single-handedly running the entire simulation. He moved from position to position with fluid grace, his assault rifle barking out precise bursts of training energy that found their targets with mechanical precision. When the simulation called for advancing to a new position, James would bound forward while his teammates shouted encouragement from behind their immovable cover positions. "Good job, James," wheezed one of the Altarians. "You're doing great. We're totally helping by staying here and providing moral support," gasped the Reptok, who was using all his strength just to keep his weapon pointed in the right direction. The simulation ended with James achieving a perfect score, while his teammates had contributed exactly 0 measurable combat effectiveness. The holographic enemy targets had been eliminated with surgical precision by 1 human operating under gravitational conditions that should have crushed him flat. Word of what happened spread through the academies, communication networks faster than a computer virus. By dinner time, every instructor, cadet, and administrative staff member knew about the human who had asked for triple gravity and then proceeded to dominate every training exercise, while his alien teammates watched helplessly from the sidelines. The attack came at 0347 hours, during the quiet shift when most of the academy was sleeping. The Krellian raiders had been planning this assault for months, timing it perfectly to catch the facility at its most vulnerable moment. Their stealth ships slipped past the outer defense grid like ghosts, and their first strike took out the main power generators in a brilliant flash of plasma fire. James Mitchell was in his quarters, writing a letter home to his family on the mining colony, when the lights went out and emergency klaxons started wailing throughout the facility. The backup power systems kicked in with a mechanical groan, but something was terribly wrong with the gravity generators. Instead of maintaining the steady, 3.6G that James had been training under, the artificial gravity began fluctuating wildly. In some sections of the academy, it dropped to almost nothing, sending unsecured objects floating toward the ceiling. In others, it spiked to crushing levels that would have been lethal to most species. The corridor outside James's room was experiencing 4.2 times standard gravity, enough to turn a simple walk into a life-threatening ordeal for any normal alien. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows as James stepped out of his quarters, pulse rifle in hand, moving with the same easy stride he'd shown during training. Down the hall, he could hear the distinctive whine of Krellian energy weapons and the panicked shouts of Academy defenders. The sounds were getting closer, which meant the raiders had already breached the main security checkpoints. James rounded a corner and found a scene of absolute chaos. 3 Krellian warriors, each standing over 7 feet tall and covered in natural bone armor, were methodically advancing down the corridor. Behind them lay the crumpled forms of Academy security personnel, who had been caught completely off guard by the gravity surge. The alien defenders who were still conscious couldn't even lift their weapons properly. A Zentarian security chief, normally capable of bench-pressing small vehicles, was flat on his back, trying desperately to raise his sidearm. An Altarian instructor was pressed against the wall, her delicate frame unable to support her own weight under the crushing gravitational force. James didn't hesitate. His pulse rifle came up smoothly, and he opened fire with controlled bursts that found their marks with deadly precision. The Krellian raiders spun around in surprise, clearly not expecting any effective resistance under these conditions. Their return fire went wide as James moved with fluid combat grace, using the corridor walls for cover while maintaining accurate fire. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. When the smoke cleared, 3 Krellian warriors lay motionless on the deck, and James was already moving to help the fallen defenders. But this was just the beginning. The Academy's communication systems were down, which meant James had no way of knowing how many raiders were in the facility or where they might strike next. He made a quick decision to conduct a systematic sweep of the complex, checking every section for both enemies and survivors. In the residential wing, he found Cadet Lyra, a promising young Altarian who had been struggling with the increased gravity training. She was trapped under a support beam that had fallen when the raiders blasted through the wall. Under normal circumstances, the beam would have been heavy, but manageable. Under 4.2G, it was like having a shuttle engine dropped on top of her. "James," she gasped when she saw him. I can't move it. I think my leg is broken." James assessed the situation quickly. The beam was massive, probably weighing several tons under the current gravity conditions. Any alien would have needed specialized lifting equipment to move it. James grabbed it with one hand, lifted it clear of Lyra's body like it was made of cardboard, and then gently pulled her to safety. "Can you walk?" he asked. Lyra tried to stand but immediately collapsed. The combination of her injury and the crushing gravity made movement impossible for her. Without hesitation, James slung his rifle across his back and lifted her into his arms. "Hold on tight," he told her. "We're getting out of here." As he carried Lyra toward the medical bay, James encountered more raiders and more trapped personnel. The pattern repeated itself over and over. Aliens pinned down by gravity that felt perfectly normal to him. Enemy combatants who couldn't understand how one defender was moving freely through conditions that should have been impossible. By the time Galactic Defense Force reinforcements arrived 3 hours later, James had single-handedly eliminated 37 Krellian raiders and rescued over 40 Academy personnel from various death traps throughout the facility. The promotion ceremony had been unlike anything in the Galactic Defense Academy's long history. Usually, cadets who survived the brutal training program were assigned to regular fleet positions or planetary defense forces. James Mitchell had been fast-tracked through officer training and given his own instructor position before his original class had even graduated. Now, 6 months after the Krellian raid that had made him a legend throughout the galaxy, Captain James Mitchell stood in front of his first mixed species class as the Academy's newest instructor. The classroom was packed with eager faces, representing a dozen different alien species, all of them looking at him with a mixture of respect and barely concealed terror. Behind James, the gravity control panel showed a reading of 1.8 times standard gravity. This had become the new compromise setting, challenging enough to push alien cadets beyond their comfort zones without actually killing them. It was a far cry from the sadistic 3.6G torture sessions that had been the norm just months before. "Welcome to advanced combat training," James began, his voice carrying easily through the classroom despite the increased gravity that had most of his students gripping their desks for support. "I know some of you have heard stories about the old training methods here at the Academy. I'm here to tell you that those protocols have been completely revised." A nervous ripple went through the classroom. In the back row, a young Altarian female raised a shaky hand. "Sir, is it true that you once asked them to triple the gravity during training?" James smiled, the same genuine expression that had confused Vexstar so many months ago. "That's true, but I want you to understand something important. I wasn't trying to show off or prove anything. I simply grew up on a world where the conditions were much harsher than standard. What felt normal to me was actually extreme by galactic standards." In the very back of the classroom, former instructor Vexstar sat hunched over a datapad, frantically taking notes on every word James spoke. The once proud alien instructor had been demoted after the James incident, as it was now known throughout the Academy, and was now required to attend remedial classes on proper training techniques. The Academy's entire philosophy had undergone a massive overhaul, where they had once used cruel hazing and impossible conditions to weed out supposedly weak species. They now focused on understanding and utilizing each species' natural advantages. The old system of breaking cadets down had been replaced with building them up. "The most important lesson we've learned," James continued, pacing slowly around the front of the classroom, "is that effective training isn't about making things as difficult as possible. It's about pushing each individual to reach their maximum potential within their own physical limitations." A Reptok cadet in the middle of the room struggled to raise his hand. "Sir, what about the stories that humans are being recruited specifically for high-gravity combat operations now?" "Those stories are absolutely true," James nodded. "After the Academy's leadership realized what humans were capable of under extreme gravitational conditions, the Galactic Defense Force began actively seeking out human recruits for specialized missions. We've discovered that what we considered normal growing up is actually a significant tactical advantage in certain combat situations. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Throughout the galaxy, military strategists were rewriting their handbooks. Planets with harsh gravitational conditions, previously considered impossible to assault or defend, were now being viewed through an entirely different lens. Human colonies that had been dismissed as backwater settlements were suddenly being recognized as training grounds for the galaxy's most elite combat forces. "But here's what I want you all to remember," James said, his tone becoming more serious. "Every species in this room has unique advantages that others don't possess. Altarians have reflexes that are 3 times faster than mine. Reptacs can survive in toxic environments that would kill me in minutes. Centaurians can calculate complex mathematical equations in their heads faster than most computers." Vexter looked up from his frantic note-taking, his 3 eyes focusing on James with something approaching understanding for the first time. The human instructor wasn't just teaching combat techniques, he was revolutionizing how different species worked together. The new protocols were implementing focus on combined arms tactics, James continued. "Instead of trying to make everyone good at everything, we're learning to use each species' strengths to cover for others' weaknesses. A human might be able to fight effectively under high gravity, but an Altarian can spot enemy movement that I would completely miss. The classroom had gone completely silent, except for the quiet hum of the gravity generators. Even the struggling cadets had stopped fidgeting as they absorbed what James was telling them. The running joke around here used to be about making training impossible for humans, James concluded with a slight grin. Now the challenge is making human-level training survivable for everyone else, while ensuring that everyone gets to showcase what makes their species special. The Academy had been forever changed, and the galaxy was taking notice.